Hello.
Hello?
Hello. Hi, everybody. Welcome to a very special episode of Curiosity Cove because we're going to be revealing our name, which is
Mm-mm-mm. It's gonna be Curiosity Corner.
Corridor. You get it? Because it's so
Sounds
fun.
so freaking cool.
It does. And then also, today we're going to be talking about
The
Mindhunters.
FBI
Yeah.
and Mindhunter.
The
Specifically, more so like the FBI, but we're also gonna
mhm.
tie it into the show, Mindhunter.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking
Mm-hmm.
about the real Mindhunters, and then we're going to go into the somewhat
Comparison?
dramatized
Mm-hmm.
version, I guess. Yeah. Um
Yeah.
so starting with how was your day?
My day kind of sucked. Not gonna
Yeah,
lie.
honestly, mine's been awful.
Oh my god, you too?
Yes, yeah, something's in the air.
Yeah, so I got to work and I was like, I was prepared. I was prepared to like jump right in, get started. Nope. I was delayed about an hour at work to start my actual day,
Mm.
like just things to do. So I was already annoyed because I'm the kind of person where if my internal time clock of how the day should go is thrown off, and I'm not talking about like, oh, 5 minutes. No, I'm talking like if it's thrown off by like this hour, I'm done.
Yeah.
The days piss me off. I don't really
Mhm.
care. Um Today was just so fucking busy and just people were on my nerves. Even some of my coworkers were like, "Damn, Jay, you're kind of giving like some sass today." And I was like, "I'm so sorry." They're like, "No, like some of it's kind of funny, but I just want to like double check like, yo, you good?" So like they checked in with me and everything, which is very sweet. But I was just like, "Damn, today kind of sucks." So I bought myself a Pizza Hut pizza, and
Oh
it kind of made my night a little better.
my god, we are on a wavelength.
Did you have Pizza Hut too?
I just finished my pizza, but it was from Luminati's.
But it's still
But
pizza
it's still
though.
pizza, yeah. What kind of pizza did you get?
Stuffed crust.
But was it
Pizza
just
Hut.
cheese?
Yeah.
Okay, I got cheese
I'm
and
a basic
sausage.
bitch. I do love me some cheese.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
won't lie.
I do. I also love cheese. I got me some cheese and like sausage on my pizza. But yeah, so honestly, kind of crazy how similar our days were. I got
What
to
happened to
work.
your morning?
Yeah, so I got to
No.
work. Slept super well last night. I got up. I was like, oh, I'm so refreshed. I literally I feel like nothing could knock me down. I go in, I get asked to come in an extra day next week.
Mm.
Yeah. And then I
Mm.
said, okay, yeah, sure. I mean, and then we're supposed to be doing this hay barrel decoration thing, right? Because it's like a
Mm-hmm,
community
mm-hmm.
event. So
Yeah.
I come up with this idea. They say yes to it. I'm very happy. We have our social media meeting, which I've been in charge of lately. And we finally made like some headway in it. So I was really happy there. And I was like, God, this is going super great. And then, like a bat out of hell, everything is going crazy. And so, like, we have so much to do next week. So now I'm really happy I'm coming in an extra day because
Yeah.
originally the plan was I come in, I work on this hay barrel all day on my extra day next week to just get it done because we have to get it done by the judging, which is on the 14th. So
Mm-hmm.
I was just supposed to come in, make it super pretty, work on that, do whatever, and then, you know, the rest of the week is just making sure that my department that I'm in, because it's only me and one other person, doesn't fall behind, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, now we're behind.
Oh.
So my extra day next week is going to be very flooded with the hay bale and then doing as much as I can to catch our department up again. And then we're
Mm-hmm.
adding something new onto our process in the department because, like, this is really awful, but we have not taken like a proper inventory count in multiple years. And there's just really no telling what's in our shop versus like what's in our computers. And we want that to be accurate. So this is a 100,000 square foot warehouse or like shop, like workshop that I'm talking about with a
Mm-hmm.
whole bunch of stock in it. And I mean, we have thousands and thousands of stock items and we have to count all of it because we just
Mm.
haven't been keeping up with it. So that sucks. And we have to start that next week. So it just like threw off my entire day because like, and then I went out they sent me out to go get stuff to decorate the hay bale, and I had to run to like dollar stores and a Walmart and an Ace Hardware and a something else and like a craft shop or whatever to find all this crap, and then I come back and I realized that the idea I said was wrong.
What do you mean?
Because my idea was to have the balloon on top of the feet with the shoes from the Wizard of Oz. And on the way back to work, I stopped at Starbucks and I was sitting in the drive-thru and I said, "Motherfucker, the house crushes the witch, not the balloon."
Yeah, when you said that to me, I was like, I mean, that's a good concept. Like, it doesn't really matter, but technically, yeah, it is a house.
Yeah, so I just haven't seen the movie in eons.
So what, you're
So
sitting in the parking lot and you got really sad?
I was sitting in the drive-thru and it was like, as the lady was handing me my drink, I was like getting upset because I got it wrong.
No.
She was handing me this super delicious coffee and I was just getting sad.
Oh no.
She
Did the
did give
coffee
me
help?
she gave me extra caramel drizzle, so it ended up being like
What
a
a
little,
babe. She
yeah.
knew.
And then
She knew.
my office mate, she left an hour earlier than I did. So I was chilling in the office and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna go listen to my music then. And I reached for my headphones. I lost my fucking headphones. It was just a cherry on top to a shitty ass day.
Oh my god.
Yeah. So I came home and I slept because I just didn't want to be around.
Yeah, if I didn't have work later and then the podcast right after, I would have totally taken a nap as well.
Yeah.
But, you know,
There's always
we would have been
after.
too twinsy, so I had to change it up, you know?
Yeah. But
Yeah, that's
I
on me.
woke up, ate my pizza right away. I'm feeling better now, so
Good.
yeah.
Fucking, what a day, man.
What a day. And it's like it's just been this strange thing too where I just like I can't spell, I can't talk. Everything is awkward for me today. I have no idea what's going on.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, speaking of words and not being able to talk, do you have any words with Vadu?
So, I don't have a word with Vadu, but I thought that I thought that I could explain what criminal profiling is because that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about. So, let's see here. I've got my little cheat sheet. So, what criminal profiling is, it's basically something that is supposed to help investigators predict and profile the characteristics and traits of an unknown subject or subjects if it's multiple people in the crime. And so they essentially try to profile this person and figure out their MO or their modus operandi, which means their mode of operating, to try to figure out, you know, when's the next time that they're gonna strike, like what should we be looking out for in a person, can we come up with like a sketch of this person. So the way that they do this, like a small summary, is they compare the crimes happening to similar crimes in the past. They analyze the crime scene. The lives of the victim or victims are analyzed. The motivation is kind of like implied in the way that the crimes are committed, so they'll kind of look at that as well. And then they'll try to get a description of the offender developed. So if you guys have ever seen something like Criminal Minds or any show where they use profiling, they'll list out all the crimes and the victims and stuff, and they'll be like, okay, well, middle part down the hair, probably a young man in his, you know, mid to late 20s, like kind of basing it off of middle parting being a thing that Ted Bundy went through. So they'll kind of build it based off of like, you know, people like the co-ed killer and Ted Bundy and all of these people who've maybe killed people of similar like traits in the past to kind of like get a pattern going. And it's just really fascinating to study, and because like this is what I was originally going to school for, so I know a little bit about it because of that. But it's just really interesting to think of it being like a tree. That's how I always thought of it. Is it's
Mhm.
like the trunk of the tree is humanity, right? And then all the branches are stemmed off for certain reasons. So like killing men versus killing women, killing young versus killing old, something like that. Each one of those is a branch that leads to a different type of criminal that may look, act, or be a certain way. And it's just cool seeing all the pieces fall into place because they'll look at things like blood splatters and they'll be like, okay, well, do this blood splatter being this way, this is somebody who's bulkier because it wouldn't have reached that high if they were of short stature or if they were, of little muscle.
Yeah.
So it's always interesting looking at stuff like that.
Yeah. One thing I always think about whenever I hear of like serial killer profiling and just overall fascination with the concept of like a serial killer or like a murderer
Mm-hmm.
is like, what is the fascination with it all? Like, why are people so drawn to it? And I
Mm-hmm.
think the thing that I came down to finding, or like at least my summary of it, is I think that the average person naturally, of course, I mean, assuming you are one in our chats, um, doesn't think about murdering or have any of those tendencies all the time or
Mm-hmm.
at all. So I feel like whenever there's an oddball, and this goes with not just like murderers, but like other oddball things or people
Mm-hmm.
that were like naturally drawn to it.
Yeah. I always wonder about that too because like people like me will take it as far as to I think I'm going to study this in school. And like granted I changed my mind, but like I was in a class of 35 other people who were interested in this. And like granted none of us were going to become FBI profilers because that shit's like a special training that you get
Mhm.
through already being in the FBI and shit. But like, there's a whole bunch of cool shit that you can do cuz like the skills that you learn with it's called forensic psychology for anybody who doesn't know, like the specific like criminal psychology per se. So there's a bunch of things you can do. You can be a professional who testifies. So like you can be the person who comes in and says, based off of my expert knowledge, this is how the crime would have been committed. This is the type of person you would be looking for. So you're basically doing it in the setting of a courtroom, and to kind of like give some insight to the case that's at hand. You can be a counselor. You can be what I wanted to be, which is a like I never say this word right. It's like recidivism, which is where it's like bringing the person who's been incarcerated for 20 years back into reality through counseling and like informing them on what's changed in the world and everything.
Mhm.
There's family reunion counseling. That's the other thing I wanted to do, where it's like, making sure that this family kind of like gets the band-aids on correctly to try to heal their relationships. So there's like a whole bunch of really sick shit that you can do with it. Um and but I always wondered like what led me to that point because I don't have any criminal history. I don't know anybody with any criminal history. Like there's not a reason for me internally to be like this is what I want to do with my life. So it had to have been external, but why?
Yeah. It's just the fascination with it all that is just like, whoa, this is supposed
Yeah.
to like creep me out. Like, why am I like so drawn to
I
this?
know, yeah. Like, why do I fall asleep to the, brutal stories of people murdering their girlfriends and boyfriends and shit?
Exactly.
Like, why do I do that?
But before we do jump into anything, I do just want to give a quick heads up to any trigger warning. This is your one and only warning. We will be also pinning it in the chat for any of
Mm-hmm.
those who do join.
Let me go ahead and do that
But
right now.
overall, as you know, trigger warning to anything that involves blood, gore, SA, um choking, stabbing, gunshots, dealing with certain murderers or the behavioral psychological aspects of them, because we will be doing a deep dive on some of the murderers that were talked about in Mindhunter, because there were a couple. And so I just want to give you that a heads up just in case. And just as a forewarning, and anything after this trigger warning will involve everything to do with Curiosity Coroner, which is our lovely new name, courtesy of Veda, by the way, if you guys didn't know.
You guys,
It was quite the
it
name.
is such a funny story because we basically were sitting there like, oh, God, we still have to name this thing. And then Cap was shooting out some names and she was like, this one, and I was like, holy shit, Curiosity Corner. And she was like, wait. And I was like, wait.
Wait, we did it.
We said,
did it,
wait,
bro.
that's it. That's it. We said literally, we sat down to finally do it. It took 3 seconds.
Yeah, like dude, why didn't we do this earlier? That's so
Literally.
stupid. But I'm so glad we at least like got it, especially on to, like today where we like find out how the like psychological profiling of murderers was done,
Right.
which is really cool.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, well then, do we want to start with a little bit of like the IRL history of the FBI and criminal profiling?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, sick.
So just a quick breakdown beforehand though of why we're picking Mindhunter, because it might be like, yo, why they keep mentioning this show? Like I thought we were talking about the
True.
FBI. I promise they are tied in hand. The reason why we picked it is because number one, it's a show on Netflix. If you haven't checked it out, I do say you should because it's amazing, especially if you like the crime junkie part. But basically a synopsis of what it is basically a show about catching a criminal, often requiring authorities to get inside a villain's mind to figure out how he or she thinks. Well, this is the job for the FBI agents Holden, Ford, and Bill Tench. Those are the two main characters that you follow along as they attempt to understand and catch serial killers by studying their damaged psyches. Along the way, the agents pioneer the development of modern serial killer profiling. So essentially, this show follows along, which is what we are about to explain, where the FBI creates the is it behavioral specials unit?
So behavioral science unit is what the
Behavioral science
BCU
unit.
or the BCU is. And then
Yes.
technically like the small task force in the beginning was called the ESCU, which is Elite Serial Crime Unit.
Yes.
Which is what
I don't think they say that in the
Mindhunter.
show.
They say it in the book.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't say, I don't think that they got to the point cuz like unfortunately you guys, Mindhunter was canceled.
It wasn't originally, and I'm so sad. Back
Yeah.
when I watched it a couple years ago, I finished season 2 and it was technically still on to make a third series. A third season, excuse me.
Yeah.
But COVID hit.
Yeah.
As well as I'm pretty sure the director of the show took on a different opportunity.
Yeah. So, and it's very upsetting because, like, as we'll talk about it later, you guys will see us nerd about it and you'll see how much people love this show because we are definitely two of those examples.
Yeah.
They did such an incredible job. I've been reading the book and, like, the way that they took the bare bones of the book and made the show, incredible. And I wish I wish somebody else would pick it up or something so that we could get more of it. But I'm only on season 2 right now. Me and my mom are watching it together. So I've got season 1's downloaded in my brain. Season 2, I have fallen asleep a couple times because we keep trying to watch them at night. But I gotta go back and watch some of them, and I've gotten like the basis of it. But yes, Mindhunter is directly based off of the book called Mindhunter inside the FBI's ECSU. And the real life people, their names are Johnny Douglas and Mark Olshaker. They're the authors of the book. So everything that's in the show is based off of this book. So it does directly tie in because it's basically a dramatization of the actual story.
I also found out during my little research, and I do have a little blurb that I will be reading from here and there just to fill in the real life things. So it found out that when they were trying to develop the beginning of the behavioral science unit, the program actually didn't become an actual unit until 10 years after it quote unquote began. Which, I mean, you can kind of follow along yearly in the show, but it doesn't give like that drastic. Like, in my mind, it doesn't make sense why it took 10 years for people to find out that, like, dang, these guys are onto something. But back in the day, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Because why in the 1970s would you just sit there and be like, oh, yeah, that's why this guy murdered these
Yep.
7 people in a row?
And everything's got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it seems like the first way that it was brought up was in 1960 by an agent named Howard Tetten, Teten, by the way, where he was just convinced that he could figure out a suspect's personalities by examining their series of crimes in the past. So he would just put himself in a room, hang out with a bunch of police reports from homicides all around the country. It wasn't just like designated in like his county. It doesn't actually even say like where he started it from. But after an arrest, he would immediately look at their not their MO, but like what they did and compare it to other ones where he seems similar in the past. And he would start picking out personality traits that he would find like, oh, well, this initial person we just arrested today seemed to have done this as a kid, and so did this murderer, which was convicted. So that's awfully similar. So they would take like bits and pieces from every single thing and try to like form this profile.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in a later time, it doesn't say exactly, but another agent called Patrick Mullaney, Mullany,
Mm-hmm.
joined in with him and became the group. I guess it wasn't the unit yet, but the first group that were like working together to profile these murderers. And it was also noted that Patrick Mullaney was an expert in quote unquote abnormal psychology.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't specify what this was, but I would have to assume that it is obviously just a mindset or way someone thinks that's different from like an average person. So all of those traits would have to somehow possibly fall into serial killer mindset because they would have to be abnormal or at least different from the normal.
Mm-hmm.
Because imagine everybody being normal, just being a serial killer.
Right.
That would be insane. Like,
Right.
what a purge day would that be? Jesus.
Yeah.
But it looks like in 1972, another agent called Robert Ressler and excuse me, I just flipped those letters. John Douglas added their own efforts to the group of Patrick Mullaney and Howard Tetten.
Mm-hmm.
So they would just try and understand why.
Mm-hmm.
That's literally the biggest thing they would try to go after. And the thing that they kept on saying, but obviously it wasn't good enough, they needed to try and find a actual reason why, was that they just kept on saying that they were insane.
Yeah.
That they can plead insanity, that they can just get away with it. Because back in the day, I don't know. Before I continue, do you happen to know if there's any cases nowadays where insanity has actually been proven? Because I know nowadays it has gotten insanely hard to prove that you're actually insane.
So yeah, there is still like you can still like plea reason of insanity or
Mhm.
and it's the equivalent of pleading not guilty. You can still make that plea.
Yeah.
What happens after that is so extensive. So like
Yeah.
more often than not, they'll actually put somebody through like before they go to trial. What will typically happen now is they will be put through a psychological evaluation to claim that they are fit to stand trial. And
Mhm.
if their plea is that like not guilty by reason of insanity, they will then have to go into more extensive testing and basically hold a retrial with the findings. It still is an affirmative defense. Um, but it's not typically one because of how advanced we have gotten in psychological studying. It's
Yeah.
not one that goes through super well. Oftentimes it ends with a plea deal. So they
Okay.
go, okay, well, if you plead guilty, we'll lessen your sentence by this. And that's for two reasons, right? The first one is they don't want to spend all the money to psychologically test this person. They know that they're
Yeah.
guilty and they just want to book them. But the other one is because if this person is mentally ill, that means that the state, they now have to become probably like a ward of the state. They have to be
Oh.
put into like a mental institution somewhere. Like it's going to cause like mass public irritation. It's not fair to the family because they don't really get any like, you know, the victims close ones don't really get any sort of closure because this person kind of just got out of pleading guilty. So
Mhm.
often, more often than not, I think they end in plea deals, but it does depend on like what your regional and state like judges
Definition.
and yeah, and like god, what's the name, like court judiciary, right?
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah. It depends on that for your like your both your state and also like the county that they're in, stuff like that. Which is why you'll see a lot of court cases that are switched to like bigger counties for bigger cases. So like
Yeah.
for instance, if you're in the only big ones I know is like Manhattan County in New York and then Cook County in Chicago.
Mhm.
If you're in like one of those surrounding areas and the crime is really, really big, they'll ship you off to Manhattan or Cook County instead of trying you in like the small county that you did the crime in.
Mhm. That's fair.
Mm-hmm.
I just know it just got insanely more difficult just because they don't like you have to prove it so much harder nowadays.
Yeah, it's
So,
definitely
like
a
back in the day,
lot
like
it's a lot
insanity.
harder to get away with pleading reason of insanity, but
Yeah.
it is still a complete defense tactic.
Mhm.
And people will
Yeah.
absolutely use it.
Yeah.
But it's no
That's
longer
true.
what happens is it used to be a loophole and it's no longer a loophole. That's basically what it
Mhm.
is.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Good. Well,
Yeah.
good. Well, moving back, the agent, specifically Agent Wrestler, was in fact the one who can get credited for coining the term "quote unquote" serial killer.
Which I love how they
Um,
did in the show. Cuz
I do. I love it so much.
Robert Ressler is Tench and John Douglas is Ford.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I love it so much.
Yeah.
So Wrestler and Douglas, obviously Tench and Ford,
Mhm.
would go to penitentiaries around the world. Specifically more so just America, but they did have some outside sources. I did find out where they would talk to like other, I don't want to say just other cops, but other like police groups or anything like that, or agents
Special
would be the
yeah,
group.
special
Yeah.
agents or
Yeah, special agents where they would be like, ever since you found this out, like we have the same thing over here, which I'll mention a little bit later. But they would go to these penitentiaries and start speaking to the killers, literally just in a room, and you can see this in the show where the killer gets hooked up to like this metal table with their cuffs and everything, and Ford and Tench would sit down with an old school recorder, and he would sit in front of a mic and they'd hit start and they'd just ask him questions. Initially they start off with like a basic series of questions just to get to know the person instead of like their crimes. And then they would get more specific and they would ask a lot of very like, I want to say personal questions because it was where they would ask like, well, why did you do that? And then sometimes the serial killers, for example, one of the big ones that they do talk to quite often in the show is Ed Kemper. If you haven't, we do have cover an episode on him specifically. I don't
mhm.
know what episode it is, but you can go ahead and go rewatch it. He is extremely messed up, but why he was an amazing person to talk to in a penitentiary was because he was most known for his good behavior in prison.
Mhm.
He was a swell guy. He would help out the guards. He would break up fights. He would talk to whoever came and talk to him. He was just an all around very sweet guy. But what they found out when they were doing these interviews was just how crooked his mind was, why he did certain things, what he felt in that moment, why certain people weren't similar to his MO that he wanted and why they weren't chosen. Um and so he just, for lack of better words, creeped me out in the show. But
Mm-hmm.
I can say the actor does a phenomenal job at like giving that creepy emotion. And I told Veda this before, and I'll say it again before I continue. This is the only show that literally almost made me want to throw up in real life instead of
Mm-hmm.
just like the like, ooh, like I'm queasy and whatnot. Like the creepy factor that this man gives, and like the scene that made me have the queasiness almost go crazy is just so good. And it comes in season 2, which I won't spoil, but
Oh, fun.
it's at
Because
the end of season 2.
I will say, so in season 1, the like got to me when it was like when they were sitting with Kemper and they were just having pizza and they were
Yeah.
kind of like going along with what he was saying. So they're like, "Oh, so your mother XYZ," and he was like, "Yeah, and get this, blah blah blah." And like Ford is like, "Damn, what a bitch." And I was like, it was so unsettling because I get the tactic, but it's like sympathizing and like feeling like comfortable enough to like slouch around this guy, or like, I mean, I know what you're doing, but still, like, it's just so ooh.
Yeah. And the whole like buddy buddy tactic that they
Mm-hmm.
do with him is just like, you know what he did. I bet you've seen the files.
And he's
And you're
admitted
gonna
it in
sit here?
front of you. Like, he has told you
Yeah.
these terrible things that he did with little to no remorse because he thinks
Mm-hmm.
what he did was. It's just the way that that guy plays Kemper,
Is insane. It's so good.
incredible. Like
Mm-hmm.
I would dare say Cameron Britton is the name of the guy who plays Ed Kemper. He carried season 1. Like
Oh, he
for
carries season 2 too.
yeah.
Yes.
I'm not too far into season 2. But I do like just I know from reading the book the differences between, and they did Ed Kemper so well in the
Mm-hmm.
show because like he's mentioned in the book, right? Like he's a huge part of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
But Ed Kemper was way dramatized in the show, and they dramatized him well enough to still feel like it's Ed Kemper, but to give you a whole new like ugh to it.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. But getting back on track because we just geeked out about Ed Kemper real quick. But um another big thing about them doing these talkings with these murderers and killers was the only rule they had was that these serial killers had to be willing to talk. They couldn't force them. Granted, could they have forced them just to sit there and have to talk? Yeah. But the moment they were like, "Nah, I'm done," like they let them go. They're like, "Yeah, take them back to their cell. Like we'll try another day, whatever." But they never really like pushed these guys. Like, did they try to weasel out a little bit more information at some points? Yeah, but they literally stayed true to the word. That they had to want to talk to him, and matter of fact, a lot of them did. They actually did want to talk to these agents, whether or not it was for their own sick joke of being like, "Yeah, I did that," or just like storytelling to relive the scene, which is just as messed up. But they did. They wanted to, and this actually helped the agents try to set up these categories, which were more generalized titles or labels for certain personalities. For example, one of the big groupings that they did find initially was the separation between organized and disorganized,
Mm-hmm.
um which then later broke down into more categories dependent on like what you're trying to find, specifically power versus control, visionary, were they mission oriented, all that
Mm-hmm.
stuff. And so a lot of those classifications that they found back in the 1970s actually still are around today. It may not be used 100% just for serial killers, obviously, but it gives agents a backdrop on in order to find out like why certain people are thinking certain ways and stuff like that. Um And on top of that, they did always go back to a place called Quantico. It is very well known. If you don't actually know what it is, that's okay. The behavioral science unit used to actually be housed in the basement of Quantico.
Mm-hmm.
Where and they did an amazing job showing this in the show
Yeah.
too. It was this dinky, dirty basement where they had, I think, the open floor plan where you can have cubicles and stuff, and like a single meeting room.
Mm.
And it was just so small. I believe there was like what, 3 people? There was Tench, Ford, and then that chick.
Anne Burgess is the real name. I can't remember what
I can't
her
I
name
think
is
it's
in the
Car or
show.
something,
Yeah, it's like
Carr.
But yeah, I can't remember her last
Yeah,
name. But
she came down there. She didn't actually work down there, but she came down there quite often.
mm-hmm.
And so they housed all their information down there. They would have meetings with the woman that would come down and help. I don't want to call her Car in case that's wrong, but the actress, she would come down and come hang out and like talk to them, try to find similarities between certain things, trying to
Wendy
find those.
Carr is her name.
It is Car.
Wendy Carr.
Oh, awesome. Beautiful. Well, you're welcome.
Mm-hmm.
And so she would come down there and try to help them find like the similarities between certain things. But the biggest issues that they had, while also having a lot of fun and like interest in finding all these categories and stuff, the biggest issue they had was actually putting these categories and what they're studying to the test. Um Putting it in on ongoing crimes, especially like big headline ones, because as we said,
Mm-hmm.
this is during the 1970s. This is no shy time to be a serial killer. So they
Right.
had a lot of things to like put there to the test to. And so they were able to find only on certain cases. I can't think of any specific as of right now, but they
I got
were
you.
able to use what they found to find the killer, or at least narrow it down a lot quicker than they would have had they not had this
Mm-hmm.
behavioral science unit before. And so this was really interesting because narrowing down that list was probably the most effective way that they have ever found in like finding out who was the killer pre-trial, because obviously you have to have someone to like point the finger at beforehand before you take them to trial. So this was the most effective way to find that person, but also to avoid wasting thousands of personnel hours and dollars to chase down leads and alibis and just things that could just be dead ends. So this behavioral analysis offered that efficient method, which
Mm-hmm.
was able to be managed quickly too. Did they have to like keep coming to Tench and Ford initially, and also Dressler and Douglas initially? Yeah. But what was amazing, and this happened like down the line, um, Quantico actually started offering a class where they could help teach FBI profilers how to do this, how they like figured out how to categorize serial killers, profile people, why they use this profile instead of this profile, and all that stuff. So they
Mm-hmm.
did um actually manage to come up with a class for people to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And they obviously, as time went on, you can actually take a class similar to this in college and whatnot if you ever go down that line, to where you can actually learn a obviously quote unquote watered down version of how to profile a serial killer or someone of a different mindset from like the normal, of course, an
Mm-hmm.
abnormal, if you will.
The class is
But
really interesting
essentially it's
too.
the same thing, yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's like they teach when they say watered down, what they mean is like it's not going to teach you like, oh, if the person has, if the victims have this in common, then it's this and blah. They teach you more so like if the crime was incredibly violent, it's probably somebody from a broken home.
Mm-hmm.
If the crime was incredibly neat, it's probably from someone with like a domineering parent, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And just to come full circle, because I always find this funny when they do it in movies. is whenever they say the title of the movie in the movie as it's going on, it
Mm-hmm.
always makes me laugh. We're like, oh, movie's end.
Yep. Roll
So
credits.
what you can find is the reason why they're called Mindhunters is the quote unquote, I mean, fake title to an FBI criminal profiler. So obviously that's their official name, a criminal profiler, excuse me. But a mind hunter is what they're called when they're literally diving into the mind of serial killers to figure
Mhm.
out why they're hunting down their victims. And I absolutely love that. I think that's absolutely amazing. I quite
Mhm.
frankly would love to have been called a mind hunter instead of a FBI criminal profiler
Yeah.
because it just sounds so much more badass.
Yeah, being able to say like saying like, oh, well, what do you do for work? Well, I'm a profiler. I'm a criminal profiler. Versus like, what do you do for work? Oh, well, I'm a mind hunter. Like that sounds so badass.
I would be like, yo, what? What do you do now?
I'm
You have
a
to tell me all about it. I would
fucking
sit there, put
mind
my
hunter.
elbows on my knees and hands
Yeah.
on my cheeks and be like,
Tell
please let
me
me know.
everything.
Tell me everything.
Yeah.
But that is all I have on the
IRL.
IRL people,
Mhm.
which, as we will say just one more time, I believe it was Andrew Dressler and John Douglas were the
Robert
real life
Robert Ressler plays or
Robert
is
Ressler.
yeah, Robert Ressler is the name of the guy who um inspired Bill
Oh,
Tench,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and then John Douglas inspired Ford, and then you guys will hear us talk about Wendy Carr from the show too.
Yes.
She is inspired by Anne Burgess, and these were all three people who actually did end up working in the BSU at one point. Um, so
Wait, so was Wendy Carr an actual character in the book too?
yes, so her name is Anne Burgess IRL, and
Yeah.
she is barely mentioned in the book, like at
Oh.
all.
I
Um,
feel like she was like low key kind of big in the show. Am
she
I wrong?
was, which is kind of crazy to me, and I think part of the reason why is because she did so much. She pioneered a lot of work in the
Yeah.
BSU, and because of that, they probably were like, well, she's going to inspire a way more important character because her perspective shook things up a lot. So the way this book is written, John Douglas, a little narcissistic in the book, which every right to because he's reporting his findings, right? But like we're talking in the book, he never gets anything wrong because he's only recording successful attempts, right? So they can't just have a show where everything goes perfectly, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in the book, it's very much like here's what Douglas did and here's how it ended up being successful or being correct. And like it doesn't really mention Robert Ressler or Bill Tench. Um or Anne Burgess, Wendy Carr. I'm gonna fuck up the names every time.
It's okay. I
Because
don't think I could say Burgess even if I wanted to,
I
because it's probably got so many vowels next to each other. I just couldn't.
um yeah, but so they helped John Douglas with a lot of this, but this book specifically is kind of like his perspective. So in the show, I think they included so much of Wendy Carr and Bill Tench because they're dramatizing it, and also because these are people that are going to be on screen that were a big part of it. They have to kind of like give them this presence that they didn't have in the book. I mean, Robert Ressler's all over it obviously, but like it's mostly just John Douglas and his. And also the book is like crazy different. Like
Mm-hmm.
very, very different. But before we get into that, I have some of the big like key moments in criminal profiling that I kind of wanted to like skim through. Just to give a little more background, because while the course of the Mindhunter book and John Douglas and Robert Ressler, while that was a big part of it, that was not the start nor was it the end. They
Mm-hmm.
were a big like progressional moment in profiling, but you can take profiling all the way back to 1888 with Jack the Ripper.
Bro.
There was a guy named Thomas Bond during the Jack the Ripper case. He actually compiled the very first criminal profile to try to determine who Jack the Ripper was. So even though he was never apprehended, Thomas Bond's like study of the autopsy notes and the evidence from the crime scene, this is kind of like where we see the very first like attempt at profiling, because he was basically saying like, you know, I believe that this guy is probably well respected, he's probably middle-aged, he's probably like an eccentric guy, he's probably pretty like lone wolf vibe, you know, not employed anywhere for a really long time. So he was doing it. He was out there saying like, based on the evidence and what I see here, I think this is the type of guy we're looking for. And that was the first time that we ever really saw any sort of profile built, was all the way back in 1888.
Dang.
Yeah. And then everything from there is basically in America and like from the 50s on. So there was a criminologist in 1957 named James Brussel, and he did like a police sketch of this guy basically named the Mad Bomber. So this guy, the guy who actually committed, his name was George Metesky. He hid 33 pipe bombs around New York City. And
I know this one.
yes, and I think he detonated around 20 of them, and injured essentially like 15 people over the course of like a decade and a half. So James Brussel was contacted by his buddy at the NYPD, whose name I think was John Cronin. He was a captain, and he wanted Brussel's help with catching this guy. So although this police sketch and kind of profile wasn't directly responsible, because of Brussel's predictions about this guy coming true, about like who he lived with and how he dressed, they basically like laid the foundation to say like, here's some key attributes you can look for in these criminals to try to identify them when you have nothing on them. So that was 57. 74 is when Patrick Mullaney and Howard Tenton were kind of like making their rounds. So 1974, Pete Dunbar, who was a FBI agent in Montana, he attended a workshop that Patrick Mullaney and Howard Tenton, however you want to say that, taught, and they were basically giving their spiel on how they thought that crime scene evidence could be analyzed to predict like a suspect's behaviors, specifically behaviors. And so Mullaney and Tenton worked with Dunbar to essentially create a profile that narrowed down suspects in a case that he was working on. And this was to catch David Merhofer, which he is a serial killer. But he was able to essentially, he was a suspect in the very beginning of the case, and we can go over his case sometime because it is very interesting. But he was a suspect from the beginning, but he actually managed to get away with passing a lie detector and, you know, quote unquote truth serum tests. So yeah, and they were able to essentially like nail him for it based off of this profile that Patrick Mullaney, Howard Tenton, and Pete Dunbar compiled. And then,
so is truth serum an actual thing?
So truth serum is actually super interesting. So the way that the truth serum works is it is like a psychoactive drug, right? And it's a barbiturate, whatever. But it's essentially like it targets your central nervous system. And basically a lot of intelligence agencies use this as a truth serum because they are like, what barbiturates do, I can't say that fucking word, whatever, what these types of drugs do
moving on
is they reduce anxiety, they like numb pain, they put you in this kind of like twilight stage, right?
Okay.
And so essentially what they allow is um they allow the person to like slip into this state, and then they essentially like coax them into answering these questions. So it's not necessarily like a real truth serum. It's just a
Mhm.
drug that they would use to get somebody in a state where what they were saying was most likely true. Um,
Mm.
there was an
But it still could not be.
right, exactly. So there was an obstetrician named Dr. House. And not like House MD. Like he's not like
Yeah, I was like,
basically
wait,
no,
house? No way.
no. But he basically found that after a bunch of experiments, he could use this thing called scopolamine, um,
Mhm.
which was one of these barbiturate. I'm gonna call them barbiturates, but I know that's not what they're called. But he basically found that he could essentially extract like the truth out of people by using scopolamine. And he put it to test in like the early 20s. There were like two guys who were in jail who volunteered to be test subjects, and they were going to essentially prove their innocence by taking this drug. And then one of the prisoners like attested to it, and he was like, yeah, after I came back I realized that during the experiment I just had a desire to answer any question I could. And I answered them all. Like I would just voluntarily tell the truth to any question that I was asked. So they basically use this as like concrete evidence of like, well, this must be a truth serum. So that's like essentially what they went on to use in like when people were testifying, or like when they suspected someone of something, is they would give them something like scopolamine, um and try to like drag the truth out of them. None of it is surefire. It's just that like this drug puts you in a state where you are more likely to just like absent-mindedly truthfully answer a question. But if you go into it with intent, like I'm positive if you were to go into it saying like I'm gonna lie my ass off, you could probably just lie your ass off.
Yeah.
Like I don't think that there is necessarily like um a point in which like you lose track of your own actual brain. It just like it puts you in like a sleepy state. And people do say cognitively when we're tired, we don't have the ability to lie as well. So maybe that's part of it, because it
Could
makes you
see
so
that.
drowsy. Maybe it just
Yeah,
puts
you're
you in
like
a
quote unquote
state.
like would you say their like inhibitions would go away or no?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, like when you look up, let me look up barbiturates. Barbiturates.
Just do a Google pronunciation real quick. I
Barbiturates.
kid.
Yeah. A class of depressant drugs that are used to treat a variety of conditions but can be highly addictive and dangerous. They're used to treat insomnia, so there's a big one.
Yeah.
Seizures, convulsions, anxiety, and purportive anxiety. Um,
Hmm.
so one of the big side effects is dizziness and vertigo, confusion and trouble thinking, which might be why every answer is like true, and
Yeah.
yeah, drowsiness. Yeah.
Interesting.
So maybe that's why. Maybe it just puts you in a state where you're so confused and drowsy that when you answer a question, you just answer it like truthfully.
Yeah. I mean that
Mm-hmm.
makes sense.
Yeah. But Dr. Robert House is to blame for that one. I studied him in school. He was a butt.
A
He
butt.
he basically had a terrible sample size, and like told the people that were in the experiment what it was going to do to them, which is not right. When you do an experiment, you have a control group and a placebo group and like all of that. Like that's how you do it accurately, right? So he
Yeah.
basically inaccurately experimented on these people with this truth serum, told them it was going to make them tell the truth, which they then go into this twilight state with that thought, like I'm going to tell the truth to everything, which means that's now their intent. And then he was
Yeah.
like, "Oh, these two people told the truth. It's pure fire. We can use
This
this in
has
our
to be true.
we can use this in our secret intelligence in the government." And like, he was a butt.
That's crazy.
Yeah. But yes, they basically, that was 1974 with Pete Dunbar, Patrick Mullaney, Howard Tayton. And then in 1980, this is when Ann Burgess joined Robert Ressler and John Douglas in the BSU. So she joined due to her, so she was studying and pioneering the study of rape victims. And the FBI director at the time was like, "I want you to come teach." So he brought her to Quantico. She was teaching classes. And essentially, while she was there, she teamed up with Ressler and Douglas to kind of like help formalize their interview when they would go out to talk to these serial killers, and help create a procedure to actually like profile people. So in the show, they do this really interesting because they kind of have a not so like run of the mill red string board, but they do kind of have that going on, and they show how they like are piecing together this like profiling system that did actually happen, and a lot of it was due to Ann Burgess. So she was actually the one who pushed like methodology with it, and pushed for gathering information and getting it out to law enforcement so that they would notice the potential that it had to predict these criminals, and like kind of like actually get to the bottom of what this person probably acts like, looks like, what kind of family they come from, how do they meet their victims, how, like, she was the one who pushed that to be like, you guys, this is really big, we should be using this. And so she's a badass. And so that happened in 1980, which I think is interesting because in the show, I think we're in like the mid 70s, right?
I'm pretty sure at the end of season 1, I'm pretty sure you should be like mid to late 70s, I think.
So I don't know if season 2, if it's any further in the future, but where I'm at, they're talking about classes to teach people this stuff. So I think it's kind of they kind of like altered the timeline a little bit. But yeah, it was in 1980, and then in 1985, which is, I only have two more, so second to last key component. 1985, the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, or the VICAP, was created. And this was to help basically connect transient murders or serial murders across jurisdictions. So this was taking criminal profiling and basically putting it on a large scale, because while now criminal profiling was definitely a thing and over time it was evolving, it was very much like state centric. So whatever state you were working in, that's the crimes you were looking at, right? And the VICAP helped to essentially connect murders in different jurisdictions. So this was the brainchild of Pierce Brooks, who was a homicide detective in LA. Actually, he wasn't even FBI. But he became the first VICAP program manager, launched it in 1985. And at the time, it was a single program on one computer in Quantico. Like, you had people who were using this to try to solve murders working from one computer in Quantico in the FBI basement.
Jesus Christ.
And so now it is a national repository for like
when I tell you the basement was so dinky, it was
oh
dinky.
My god, literally, yeah. It was
it's
like
kind of funny though.
I know.
I like it in this show.
It's funny to me, and it's especially funny whenever it's like you think about the fact that like the only other things down there are probably like janitor equipment and like boiler room or whatever else to run the building.
Like they extra junk down there just cuz.
It's like half storage.
Sure at one point, like one corner of like their basement is just junk.
Yeah, like it's just like
They rifle through it at one
I
point.
like
It's
to
so
imagine
funny.
I like to imagine that all like the holiday decorations are down there just surrounding
Yeah.
them while they work.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
But yeah, so the ViCap was started in 1985. For those of you who don't know, the ViCap program is something that we still use today, and it is nationwide. Basically any violent crime, like homicide, SA, any missing persons or unidentified humans, like your Jane Does and your John Smiths and all of that, they're all logged so that there can be a database to essentially find links between things if need be. So things like finding the MO, finding victim details and crime scene evidence, like all basically locked away. And in 2008 or 9, I can't remember what it said, the ViCap became accessible to all like crime and like law enforcement. So your local, your state, your secret agencies, your FBI, your CIA, all of that. Basically any law enforcement can now operate it, not just the FBI. And then lastly, in 2010, so this is our most recent one, and I want to like make a note of how crazy this is. This is from 1888 to 2010. Were chronicles, like these are the chronicles of profiling. But the BTAC, which people have probably heard, it's the Behavioral Threat Assessment Center, becomes the first national multi-agency task force that prevents like terrorism or targeted violence. So this includes things like workplace violence, stalking, active shooters in public places, things like that. It's basically a whole bunch of mental health professionals, agents, analysts, and researchers from places like the FBI, Capitol Police, Marshal Service, the DoD, the ATF. They all work together to track people who have like logged concern, and they use practices that allow for like early intervention. So some people are actually found and talked basically off the ledge before they even commit their crimes. And that is something that started in 2010 and is still going strong today.
I
So
like that.
Yeah, so that's kind of like your overarching map for like the key components to profiling. So I believe with that we should be able to jump right into everything that's covered. I'm so excited for this, but we should be able to go ahead and jump in and talk about Mindhunter. And if you want to talk about spots throughout the show, I can probably actually tell you how they happen in the book, or if I know anything about like the IRL crimes, because a lot of the stuff that they did is either based off of something and it's not exactly correct, or it is a real crime but the names are changed. I've learned that as I've been reading.
Yeah, I've been noticing that as well. So I'm gonna kind of follow your lead with this one, but I do have something to start out with, but I don't want to give away spoilers for season 2.
Yeah.
That's the
Okay.
biggest thing that
Okay.
I told
Fair.
Veda I
Fair.
also
Fair.
didn't want to do. But I wanted to ask, in season 1, did you get any scenes with BTK?
Yeah. So okay, me and
He's
my
not called
mom.
that in the show.
Yeah. So me and my mom called this actually.
Oh,
They do say BTK.
I thought that he was under some other name.
I think they did. I think they did like a double name thing, because me and my mom started watching the second season and they called him BTK for Bind, Torture, Kill. But
Yeah, I
don't
think they gave him that after though.
Yeah, so they obviously don't. I love how they've done this too, because they showed Kansas City, and me and my mom snapped our heads at each other, and we were like, BTK. Like, it was so funny.
The teasers for BTK, all of
Yes.
season 1, which wasn't, like, all the time, but whenever it popped up, I was like, "What are they gonna do with this guy?"
I know. Well, the first thing I saw the location, and so immediately I knew what they were probably heading towards because they had been getting all of these like big name serial killers, and like they were
Mhm.
talking about like Manson and
Manson was
like,
in it, yeah.
you know, they had Speck and they did Ed Kemper and all this stuff. And something that I thought was interesting was that a lot of the small cases they changed the name. Like one of the big cases that they worked on in the beginning of the show was, in the show, I think her name was, it Beverly Jean Shaw? Was that the name of the character?
For what case?
So the case where the guy and his brother's wife were all in on it.
Oh, yes.
Okay. So her name IRL is Betty Jean Shade. And this story is like similar but not exact to the show. And so when I was reading the book and they were talking about it, I was like, oh, this is the one they covered in the show. And I think it's interesting that they changed the names of the smaller cases, but they like pushed the names of like the big people that they worked with. My assumption is due to like maybe they were shielding like the small cases because they're a little more personal versus like, I mean, Ed Kemper and Richard Speck and all, they were all over the news, right? So like
Yeah.
people of that caliber were just they were constantly on the news anyways. So
Like, there's nothing really, quote unquote, to hide.
yeah, exactly. So maybe
Yeah.
that's why. But I did find it interesting because like reading through the book and seeing like like the names that are used and like being able to connect them to the show, it is very interesting. But then like the BTK stuff was like he's not in the book at all. So that was interesting to me starting to read it, because I looked it up to make sure that it was the right book, right? Because I was reading it and I was like, okay, wait, this seems like it's the same story but it's different. Is the show fake and they just use like the basis of the book? So I was like looking up and one of the big things was BTK is not in the book. And so I was like, well, that's interesting. So what are they gonna do with BTK?
Wait, I'm curious. Is BTK even in this timeline? Was he in the 70s?
The BTK killer was definitely in the 70s, but I
Okay.
want to say that he was active like in the mid 70s. Like, so the reason they're probably using him is because where the show is set right now is the prime timeline for him to begin.
So it was from 1974 to 1991.
Yes.
But I know later down the line, he, like, falls off.
Right. Yeah, he falls off.
I mean, hey, like,
Yeah.
wrong term, but right idea.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is prime time during this. So
Yeah,
it makes sense, but, like, interesting.
Mm-hmm. And I was wondering what they were gonna do, because they were teasing it like it was gonna be the big thing in season 2, and I feel like we're 3 or 4 episodes into season 2, and I'm like, okay, so we're not just focusing hardcore, because they've got this thing going on in Atlanta, and like we're not just focusing on BTK right now. So when does this come into play? So I've been sitting here wondering, like, how is this gonna come to fruition? Like, are they gonna get letters? Are they gonna get like,
Do you want me to let you know, or
no?
Okay.
But I do want to talk to you after I watch the second season.
Okay. For sure.
But yeah, like it is interesting to see them kind of like tease it. And I like the way that they did it, because the teasers went from being just little snippets like him running or whatever to like full ass scenes.
The bathroom.
Yeah. Dude, That scene was wild.
The bathroom scene got me.
Yeah.
I was like, "What is he doing?"
Yeah.
And then I saw it and I was like, "Oh my god."
Yeah. He's like, I'm just playing around.
Yeah, he's
Like,
like, "Don't
homie.
worry about
Homie.
it." Like,
I wouldn't want
please,
to
I need
walk in
to.
on Maya so doing that. Are you kidding?
Yeah, no.
Oh my god, yeah.
What
But
else? Didn't they actually like interview Manson?
I
Wasn't that
don't
one of the initial
I
ones?
haven't gotten to Manson yet, so if they did,
Have you gotten
um
to any interviews?
yeah,
Right?
so he basically what this book is like like the chronicles of all the things that he got right, right? So I've gotten to a few. None of them are like big. I mean, he talks about Kemper for sure, but like none of them are like huge names yet. You know what I mean? Like I haven't seen him interviewing anybody who is of such a status of serial killer like infamy that I've actually recognized the name. Um
Okay.
I am only like a quarter of the way into the book though. And then I
Yeah.
know a little bit of it because of how I was which I don't really care about spoilers because it's all true crime anyway. Um but I know a little bit about it because of some of the stuff that I researched for today.
Mhm.
So if you want, we can talk about that stuff. I can go through some of the stuff that I learned about the differences between the book and the show, and we can kind of just like talk about it.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I'll
So,
follow up with like some stuff that I also remember from the show
hell
when you
yeah.
say it because I'm trying really hard not to give spoilers because it is very good.
Yeah.
Um, this one's not really a spoiler, but since you did bring up Manson,
Hmm.
I do remember now that I said it, you do see him interviewed in the second season. It
Yeah,
was the second part.
the episode that we're on, they just said we've booked Manson for next week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I won't lie, like I was like, huh, I want to see how close they got this, like a side
Not
by
is
side.
it's not close at all, is it?
No, it's pretty close.
Really?
Yeah, like they got the
Oh.
guy they got for him. Like I looked up pictures because I couldn't think of what he looked like other than like a generic like, I think
Yeah.
so, off the top of my head. And I looked
Yeah.
at it and I was like, okay, I
Oh,
see it.
interesting.
I think I at least to me, I'm not like too far of a deep dive into Manson, but I think they do a pretty decent job at least.
Yeah. Okay. Um cool. All right, so I'll just go through some of the stuff that I've learned. So, the first one is that I've already mentioned it, but I just have them noted down here of like things that I've noticed. So in the book, John Douglas is perfect. Like he doesn't get anything wrong. Versus in the show, as we have seen, he fucks up a lot.
Yeah.
He makes pretty big mistakes. He gets himself into some pretty tricky situations. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Just that they did so well on like creating these, because while John Douglas and Robert Russell were like Barry Resler were off like obviously the inspiration for these characters, this is not the true story. This is a dramatization of some like that is based off of how it was formed, but by no means is the story of how it was formed. So there is a fine line between making something like nonfiction and making it like fiction based on nonfiction. This definitely falls on the latter. Like there's very big differences that are very fictional, and I mean we're talking like whole crimes, whole characters that never existed being put into
Mm-hmm.
the show. So I just want to make sure to put that out there, because you don't want to go telling somebody that you know how the BSU was formed and then explain Mindhunter the show because it's not accurate.
Yeah. Like, please do not. Like, there's
Yeah.
other things that like were into play, but like you have to understand
Hmm.
that Mindhunter is still gonna be a TV show
Yes.
drama first.
Yeah.
Like, it has
So
to be entertaining.
yeah, so that's why I wanted to start with the the Douglas being perfect thing, is because they're pulling from a book in which only accuracy is reported, because this is essentially like John Douglas explaining the assessments of all of these individual serial killers that they interviewed. And because the assessments are based on prior cases, he only includes the ones that were correct. And because of that, there's no like mistake of judgment or misanalysis in the book, versus obviously that's not how obviously it was not a perfect score in real life, and so they show you that in the show, but they didn't have anything to go off of, so all of the mistakes that are made and everything, they're fictional. They're like put in there for drama. So that was one I definitely wanted to start with. The second one was just the dramatization in general. So in the book, obviously because it's a nonfiction book, everything is very factual. I mean, the interviews that you get on the show and what's reported in the book are like vastly different. And I think the show did an incredible job of like steering us down the path of like, this is terrifying and unsettling, without making it like too dramatized, because I was actually shocked to learn how different the interviewing went in the book versus in the show.
In what regard?
The interviews in the book are essentially just like, you know, we asked this question, this was the response, this was the reason we got for it, versus obviously in the show you've got shit like the one guy with the bird, or like Ed Kemper with the pizza. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you have those scenes and those tactics they used where he got buddy with Ed Kemper. The one Jim, is his name Jim Barney? Jim Bear, whatever, the guy in the second season that goes with Holden to interview the guy who throws the bird.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, remember how he got under his skin and he like gave him the mallow cups, which by the way, it was amazing seeing mallow cups in the show.
Yeah.
But he like slid him the mallow cup, and then they kind of like got to talking about it, and they kind of riled him up to like, you know, basically admit that he had no predisposition, that he was like, I didn't know I was gonna kill him, I just did. Stuff like that doesn't happen in the book. Like that, it's not that engaging at all.
Yeah, I also don't see like stepping aside from the show, like I don't see those people IRL doing that.
Yeah.
At least not back then. They wouldn't have known. That's like a tactic that they do nowadays for people to try and rile them up, get them to say things, trip them up. But back in the day, it would have just been the basic, hi, state your name.
Yeah.
Where are you from? What's your age? And then follow up with like, so we know you did it. So here's what we found. And it would just be so matter-of-factly, but I kind of like, I know it's wrong because technically it's just a TV show, but I like the way that they make Holden seem like a bad guy for doing that.
Me too. And I love
like, it's
the
super interesting.
I love the way that his emotions are externally displayed in the show, because he himself feels very analytical. Like no showing of actual emotion. Take his breakup, for example. That shit was crazy to me.
Oh, him and his girlfriend? Yeah.
Yeah, the scene where he was basically like, he profiled her to deduce that she was breaking up with him, and then he was just like, all right, well, let's make this easy then, I'll drop off my shit next week, and just walked away. And it seemingly had like no effect on him until you see everything break him in the end of the first season. Like that shit was wild to me. I was like, dude, show, cry, do anything.
Yeah,
literally do anything.
It even said the IRL guy who was what Holden Ford was based off of, like he also had panic attacks and anxiety attacks from doing these interviews. Like, we're not saying this for shits and gigs. Like, the people who had to go and do these interviews with these killers, it takes a certain level of like mental fortitude and emotional stability to go in a room with someone who has murdered people. Not just one, multiple people and then have to, like, as in the show, be all buddy buddy with them to try and get more out of them. Like, that's insane.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like it's one of those things of they did a really good job leading up to the because okay, so the whole first season, for anybody who hasn't seen it, you can see the stressors piling on to Ford and Tench. And they do
Yeah.
it in a very clever way. In the very beginning of the show, if you go back and watch it, it is super interesting to see. Ford's excitement is at like a 10. And throughout the first season, you just see it dropping. Like they portrayed that incredibly well because he stops getting so enthusiastic and he starts getting nitpicky.
Mhm.
And so you can see that it goes from being something that he is excited and enthusiastic and looking forward to doing into this is a job that I have to live with and I'm putting my nose to the grindstone because I wanted this and I have to do it. And you can see it getting to him and you can see it getting to Bill. And at first they're making comments because they're interviewing Ed Kemper and they're like, oh, this guy makes me sick, da da da, can't believe it, blah blah blah. But they're still kind of like, this is for the greater good and I'm excited that we can use this information. I believe in this. To when we're at the end of the first season, I mean, like Holden's lost it.
Yeah.
Like he's gone, dude. He's like he has his first panic attack, and you can see everything they've been building up to was to show, yeah, it does take a toll, and eventually you're gonna snap from it.
I think what's interesting though is that Holden snaps differently from how Tench reacts.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you've seen exactly what happens yet with him, but Tench has, like, I won't say like a drastically different reaction, but Holden reacts in a very emotional, panic attack, anxiety kind of way,
Mm-hmm.
when Tench does not. He
Yeah.
reacts like anger, like he
Yeah.
gets mad. And I think that's so interesting to see the difference between the two, just because I feel like Holden has a very mm, analytical side of things, like the way
Mm-hmm.
he thinks, whereas Tench is very like by the books. Like he is like, yeah, we have to do this and like that. When Holden's like, no, if we do like this path and this outcome will happen, then this outcome will happen. So naturally, I feel like the anxiety attack that comes from like what Holden is going through would naturally come out like an anxiety attack. But
Mm-hmm.
the way that Tench reacts out of anger, where he's just supposed to be like this steadfast, strong
Mm-hmm.
man, and yet he just crumbles and lashes out, is so interesting to me.
Yeah.
I know I won't say exactly like why he does that, but like the differences is so interesting to me, and like how they like come together and like still work as like partners and stuff is also an interesting dynamic throughout the whole show, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, completely agreed.
I
I
like it a
just
lot though.
yeah, I do too.
I have to say,
Um
probably my all-time favorite thing about the show entirely. Do I like the whole concept of like following along with the BSU? Yeah, I do. I think it's actually very knowledgeable, even though some things might be inherently wrong or slash
mhm.
false about like the show and whatnot. I like the story as a whole, but I think by far my like top reason for watching is still Ed Kemper.
Okay, so the next two things that I have are actually related to this.
Oh yes, this is
Yes.
perfect.
So one of them
I
is
just
that
segued.
yes, you did perfectly actually. So one of them is that the when you look at the book versus the show portrays this idea that criminal psychology and profiling was like just under the surface and it was underappreciated and how it was, it was basically ignored as a perspective that could be used, right? So Holden comes in and he's like, we could be talking to these people, we could be doing this and blah 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 blah. The book is more so a thing of like a new door has been opened. This is something we've never thought about doing before. Interviewing Ed Kemper is something no one has ever thought to do before. Versus in the show, it's like it's the seed that's already been planted and Holden's trying to push it forward. In the book, John Douglas is like, this is brand spanking new and I get to do this. So I thought that was really cool how they did it in the show. Because basically, like, being assigned something versus figuring something out and pushing for it, especially in the think of, like, they hold Ed Kemper as like this, you know, pivotal moment, right? In the book, it's kind of underplayed because it's just like this thing of this is for work and this is something that, you know, nobody's ever done before, so let's give it a shot. Versus Holden's like, I really think this could be important. And then it's like that justification that kind of happens when he gets to talk to Kemper, where it's like, you don't really get that in the book because this is just like, this is a new trial. Is like, okay, well, let's talk to him, see if maybe we can get something out of them from that way. Versus in the show, it's like, you want to talk to these fucking crazy people? Are you, what? Are you insane? Yeah. And then getting to see that his idea gets justified as they start building this, that to me is way more of, it makes sense that they would do it in the show because it's way more of like a powerful thing. You know, it's shit, I was right, versus in the book, it's like, shit, we can do this.
Yeah, I agree. I like the like side by side a lot.
Yeah, so I think that's cool. And then the last thing that I have that I thought was crazy, because the other two I mentioned, like BTK is not in the book, Wendy Carr and the person that she was based off of is not in the book very much at all. And then like an honorary mention, I guess, the book is fucking brutal. It is disgusting, some of it.
Oh no.
So it is actually way more disturbing than the show. And most of it is just because, since it's like a factual thing, there doesn't need to be drama. I mean, the opening to this book, I will read it to you after the podcast. It is disgusting. And I mean, I opened the book, I started reading, and I said, "Oh my god." But it doesn't. I think the thing is that this is because it's his personal journey. He's like just describing it in great detail, like everything that happened, how he felt, you know, everything. And I mean, like, it goes like straight into like a super gory dream that he was having. And so like that's my honorary mention, is that it is so brutally gory. I just can't. But the last thing I wanted to mention is the very infamous scene of Kemper in the hospital. So, for those of you who haven't seen, it's the last scene in the first season, before they basically reveal to you that Ford has been broken. And I think now, given everything we've talked about, I understand why they did this. But when I came across this fact, I was like, huh, interesting. That scene happened. It was not Ford.
What do you mean?
So Kemper, let me go ahead and paint the picture here. So in the show, Ford basically goes to visit Kemper after everything starts going to shit, and Kemper gets out of his hospital bed because he's in the hospital room, and he's basically like, you know, the security in here sucks. If I wanted to, I could probably, you know, take you out right here with no issue, and blah 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 blah. That didn't happen to John Douglas, the guy who Ford is based off of. It actually happened to Robert Ressler, who Tench is based off of.
Really?
So it was a similar interaction, not the exact same, but it actually happened to Robert Ressler. He had a similar interaction with Kemper, in which he was actually forced to call in the guards. And then Kemper was basically like, man, I was just joking. Man, it wasn't anything. It was just joking. And I was shocked to learn that they flipped the characters. But now I think, given the storyline of the show, it was probably way more important that that happened to Holden to break him than to happen to Tench, who by the end of the first season you can already tell is done with this shit.
Wait, I think... Okay, I'm kind of glad I didn't say anything until now, but I think that's the scene that made me sick.
The one in the hospital where he like...
So, is that the one where Kemper gets really close?
Yeah, and he caresses his fucking face.
That's the scene that made me feel sick.
Oh god, I just got chills thinking about it.
So
yeah.
I didn't want to say anything in case that was in the second season. I didn't know if it was the beginning of the second season or the end.
No, it's the
I had
very
a
end of the
feeling it was the
first.
finale for season 1. That scene makes me sick.
Dude, my skin crawled watching it.
Oh,
I
dude,
will not
when
lie.
I was sitting in my little dorm room, and mind you, picture me on my little twin XL bed, because that's all you fucking get in college. You're sitting there, and I'm like snuggled up, and I have like a blanket on, because I wasn't like had it up to my neck yet. I was just kind of lounging, chilling, and I'm watching, and like Kemper gets closer, like as they keep talking or something. And then, like, gets really close and says, I forget what he says, but it's just, and, like, caresses his cheek.
He basically says, dude, it's terrifying, because he basically...
It's disgusting.
He's like going on about how, like, security in the hospital ward of the prison sucks, and he's like, you know, nobody comes in here, and if I wanted to... And he's, like, getting closer and towering over
And
Ford
Kemper's a big dude.
I mean... big, like
Huge.
6'5" big, like he's huge. And he's towering over him, and he's getting close, and he's like starting to like lower his voice because he's closer, and he's like, you know, I could probably take you out right here without a problem, you know, I'm bigger than you, I could do it, and you know, they probably wouldn't even notice right away, and you could probably scream for help and nobody would hear you. And it's just like, ooh,
skin crawling.
I put myself in his shoes for like half a second and I couldn't do it. I wouldn't have even.
I literally pulled the blanket up to my chin, had it tucked, watched it, and then the roll credits happened.
Yeah.
Threw my blanket off, went in the bathroom, and I just stood there for a second. I was like, that scene was so fucking good, but like, no.
Yeah.
That was horrible, but I gotta say, I still stand by it. That is probably the creepiest scene I've ever seen in a show/movie that made my skin just crawl.
I have heard true crime stories that did not make my skin crawl as much as that. It's insane how well they did that scene. And like, hearing that it was actually like Tench, I was like, dude, if you put him in that scenario, it would have been such a different vibe. It would not have been
but
as
imagine
creepy.
Him breaking because of that too.
Yeah, and
that would have been crazy.
I know. And like, I think one of the things that really like, so I was talking to my mom about this, and this is probably the last thing that I have to say on Mindhunter.
Yeah.
In our conversation today, so after that I'll hand it off to you to say whatever. But I was talking to my mom about that scene, and for anybody who doesn't know me, I love looking for like the hidden agendas or like the underlying themes in shows, right? And I love picking them apart because I love seeing the choices that the writers made or directors made. I think my interpretation of it is that the vibe of that scene is Holden just basically blew it with the BSU, right? Like, he's got some shit going on. His girlfriend dumped him. He's like not giving a shit a little bit right now. He's kind of lost. And his thought was, I am the same as these people I've been studying. That was his subconscious thought. And so he said, I need to go talk to Kemper because maybe he's right and maybe we are connected. Maybe I do have some sort of similarity with these people I've been studying. Maybe I'm becoming them in a way. And so I think he went to get solace. Yeah. And the reason that they did that in the show was because they wanted to show you, like, this is where his mindset is. He thinks that he's as low as these people he's been studying. And he wants to go to remind himself that he is not this person, that he is not Ed Kemper, that he is not somebody who's friends with Ed Kemper, that he is a FBI agent, that he is doing work to help stop people like Ed Kemper. And I think when he gets there, everything hits him in that moment with Kemper, because he realizes this could have killed me. I have been so unaware of my surroundings and what I've actually been doing. I just almost got myself killed. And I think it just all floods to him right there. And I think
it was
that
definitely
is
a rush of emotions.
I think that was an incredible choice for the writers to make that scene with Holden.
I agree.
Oh yeah.
Well, we are past the hour-and-a-half mark. I think we'll wind on down and kick it in for next week, huh?
Hell yeah. And you guys know what next week is. It's the same thing we do every second week of the month.
Astrology Corner! And it is probably one of the ones that we're most close to. Not meaning like me and Veda are like that
proximity wise with our dates, but
yeah, but we do know one. And I think we're going to point a lot of fingers on this next week podcast. But again, you guys will have to see next week. And with that, remember, Coveys, keep it real,
but keep it curious. Goodbye.